Hey, everybody, welcome to another On This Day in Canadian Military History live stream. This one I'm very excited about because it's a topic that I'll straight up say it right now, I don't know as much as I'd like. It's a bit of a learning curve for me as well, doing some research this morning. So today what we're looking at is the minesweeping of the Scheldt Estuary. Now we're going to get into all what that means, the technical stuff, the geopolitical stuff, strategy, all of it. So it's a complicated topic, but I'm really excited to start diving into it. And our guest today, Nick Stanley, has proper experience in minesweeping. So that is huge. So he joined the Royal Navy in 1977. He qualified as a Marine Warfare and Clearance Diving Officer in 1981, which to me just sounds super cool. Served as a Mine Warfare and Diving Officer in Minesweepers as well. Commanded Mine Hunter, I hope I pronounced these names correctly, HMS Walney, and then commanded the frigate HMS Grifton, and then captained the Royal Navy, in charge of all of the Royal Navy's minesweeping diving groups and patrol vessels in that area, and then left the Royal Navy a few years ago in 2017. So we're going to get someone who knows what this means. This isn't just academic guessing. This is hard-won knowledge. So I'm really excited for this one. Hey, Nick, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, great to be here.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. For those watching live, at any point, this one especially, if you got questions, we will stop and we will delve into them because I know some of this stuff is quite technical. And then again, there's all kinds of stuff going on. So feel free, if confused or you've got your own insights, fire away and we will handle it the best we can. So, Nick, this is, again, like I said, great to have you here. Very excited. I was wondering if you could I gave you that brief bio that you had sent to me. I just wondering if you can just dive in a little bit more, dive into it, pun not intended. If you could just talk about a little bit more of your background in this area, because to me it sounds so fascinating.
Yeah, well, I served in the Navy for 40 years and 7 months, I think, and some days as well. I sort of joined on a short-term commission, and they sort of gave me some various options in where I wanted my career as a warfare officer to be, and I decided I wanted to be in the mine warfare and diving game, which wasn't a good call in the sense that I got seasick. So you're serving in small ships and you're spending time with a bucket. Hey, I just loved life on board small ships. You're working with a small team. And we were specialists in mine warfare, in diving. Mine warfare includes minesweeping, mine hunting, different techniques, and ordnance disposal, underwater bomb and mine disposal. So I was on board a couple of smaller vessels on that. Then later my career moved into anti-submarine specialist on board a frigate. Then they sent me back to command a mine hunter. Then they were kind enough to trust me with a anti-submarine frigate. And that was my career. But I was always interested in naval and military history. And when I left, or shortly before I left, I started running a Twitter account just to do a day-by-day feed on minesweepers and what they were doing during the war, because it was an unknown area. Mm-hmm. And I hear all Canadians out there saying, we know how you feel. So I really wanted to... Yeah. I really wanted to pay tribute and honour the achievements of the Royal Navy and the Royal Naval Patrol Service personnel and what they achieved during the war, because minesweeping was an absolutely fundamental part of the maritime war. It was initially on the defensive, trying to keep the sea lanes of communication open, and then on the offensive, and allowing invasions and amphibious assaults to take place. So that's what I do with my Twitter account, Sweepers3945.
Yeah, and there's a link to that in the description below. And I'm gonna toot your horn for you here, Nick. But I've been following you for. I started my Twitter account now 2.5 years ago, I think, something like that. And I think yours is one of the first I started following when I was trying to build up this sort of base in military history, connecting to the great community that does exist on Twitter that is connected to military history. A lot of crap out there, but also a lot of good people. So it's one of your accounts was great to learn, because like I said, I still learn every day. Like, you post so much and it's so insightful. And it's so like what I try to do, like the big and the small, and it's amazing. So if you're on Twitter and you're not following Nick, do it. Description below, it's down there. Just do it. It's a good one. So it's a good account to follow, especially if you don't know anything and you're tangentially interested. Still do it because you'll learn and you'll get interested. Anyway, so yeah, that's great. So with the Scheldt, if you don't mind moving forward here, like I was talking to you before, there is a lot of misconceptions, a lot of, let's say, axes to grind. Like you just said, Canadians, we're not talked about enough. And I say this all the time. We got a little bit of a chip on our shoulder, and the fighting in the Scheldt is part of that. Now, we are here to talk about the minesweeping. But again, as a lot of us know, the Scheldt is a very difficult place to fight on the land. Good chunk of it was actually on the water, the inland navy, all that stuff. Now, I was just wondering if we can start. Well, I'll pull up the slides here, which we've got going today, which is, oh, sorry, wrong one. I'm gonna bring us, oh, here we go. Stuff keeps popping up. Anyway, so here's Nick's Twitter again. And there's some great pictures here. So we'll just get moving with this. Oh, sorry, 1 second. I was on the wrong slide. These quotes are pretty awesome that we have, that you've pulled from several different leaders. So if you could just kind of read those out, or I can do it and then kind of explain the context a little bit here.
Yeah, well, this is the first one. This is from Admiral Ramsey, who was naval commander, and he was sort of the brains behind Operation Neptune, which was the delivery of the invasion force into Northwest Europe. Very experienced admiral. He'd been the brains behind the retreat from or the evacuation from Dunkirk. And he was a very bright, incredibly capable leader who died tragically before the war finished in an air accident in France, just outside of Paris. But Ramsey, being a navally minded admiral, he spotted straight away that the key factor when Antwerp was captured by local resistance in the 11th Armored Division, I think on the 4th of September, that wasn't the whole thing. And yes, getting Antwerp was great, but as the quote shows, as a naval man, he fully appreciated that it was absolutely of little value having a world-class port available to sustain your armies if you weren't able to get the shipping up there. And whilst Germany and German forces occupied the banks to the north and the south of the Scheldt, then nothing could be done. So he was shouting immediately for a greater vigor, greater energy in clearing the banks of the Scheldt. We know, Canada knows, we know that he didn't get his way in terms of the urgency attached to that, and therefore other adventures took place, such as Market Garden, when, in a strategic sense, quite clearly, the effort should have been in towards clearing the Scheldt to enable Antwerp for the final stages of the war, because without Antwerp, it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, and right, and me and you were just talking before we started here about the issues with the other ports, with Brest being unused the entire war, Cherbourg, which is way far away, taking some time to come online, the issues with bringing supplies on the beaches, and then the smaller channel ports and all that kind of stuff. So again, it's important. And well, and what's also interesting is the other figure of quotes that you provide, who, again, you can kind of talk about what Eisenhower, who is in charge of all of this, has to say.
Yeah, I think my reading of the history is that after Market Garden, I think Eisenhower was fairly blunt with Montgomery about the needs of the Allied armies, not just 21st Army Group, but the American Army Group to the south of it, and it was all going to be coming in through Antwerp. So it was at that point that I think 14th, 15th of October, where Montgomery issued his orders to the 1st Canadian Army that clearly made 1st Canadian Army and the Scheldt clearance the main effort for 21st Army Group. And if you go into a sort of a naval or maritime theory, strategic theory on that, That then means that the 21st Army Group is essentially fighting a maritime campaign, because it's fighting a campaign to free a port to allow the passage of merchant vessels. So at that point, although they're fighting on land, the campaign is a maritime campaign because it's all about sea lines of communication and stores coming in by sea.
Yeah.
And there you see some of the quotes attributed to Eisenhower. He was also writing back to Marshall, his boss back in the States, saying, you know, without Antwerp, we're going nowhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, yeah, sorry, just come back. I think that's an important point, talking about that this is a maritime campaign. That's a one I haven't actually heard that said that bluntly, I guess is the best way to put it. But it's true, you're right. And I don't think, and I say we, I mean just generally we, people who are interested in this, don't think about it that way. Yeah, the conditions get talked about, and I know people watching now, Norma, who watches and is a great supporter of the channel, is very interested in the Scheldt and the battle and all of it. So, and the conditions. We talk about that quite frequently when other stuff comes up, or we're just talking about the Scheldt. But we know what that looks like. Yeah, a lot of it's waterlogged because of actions by the Germans, Allied bombing, et cetera, et cetera. But to think about it as a maritime campaign, I think is kind of one of those, you know, mind-blowing moments to think about what that means and what the strategic outcomes are.
But it was clearly that, because the chances of advancing into Germany without Antwerp, as you say, the Cherbourg still wasn't fully open. The beaches weren't functioning brilliantly.
Mm-hmm.
I think you were getting about between 10 and 15,000 tons a day through Cherbourg. Well, you were getting that through Antwerp within days of it being reopening.
Yeah.
And so the volume and the capacity of Antwerp, they actually had to dial it down in Antwerp because they had nowhere to store the stores.
Yeah.
But, you know, Antwerp would just suck up everything that those two army groups needed.
Yeah, that's another kind of, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but I do think it's an important point. Yeah, at one point Antwerp is so busy and they're sending in ammunition, obviously needed, and they have to stop because they have nowhere to go because there's so many ships, there's nowhere to store all this, and it's dangerous, right? And there's things like the V1, V2 rocket attacks, all that kind of stuff. But it's just, I think to me that's so interesting, right? Because you hear supply issues, and then we got too much. So I think it shows such an importance of Antwerp and why things like the minesweeping are so important. So This is a great map that you've included, and I think it shows the theater very well.
Yeah, I don't take any credit for this. I just found it, and it's the to give credit where it's due. It's on the Traces of War website.
Yep.
Which is run as a Dutch website and very informative. Some really good information about the Battle of the Scheldt, and I thought this was one of the best depictions of the. Well, I use a military term. This is the battle space, so I really want to talk about the battle space here. So, are you happy for me to move on to this one, Brad?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Yep. Okay, so what you see there is the Scheldt Estuary, and obviously, in terms of those who followed the Army's campaign, that will be familiar. My focus is really on the shoreline and the blue bit in the middle, really. Down just off screen to the left, you've got Ostend and Zeebrugge, which had been Ostend had recently been captured, hadn't been opened. It was just thoroughly mined and trashed, and block ships started. So Ostend wasn't useful, but it was a good rallying point for the forces that would go on into sweep the Scheldt. And what you've got there is, the land is very flat. Well, we know the implications of that for your infantry, for your armor.
Yeah.
Also, significant implications for your maritime forces, because there's nothing to stop the wind. And this is a battle. This is an operation that starts at the beginning of November, and to use a cricket analogy, rain stops play on a number of days, because you're getting a succession of gales whistling through when the sweepers just can't operate. And the waters themselves are very, very confined. They are narrow. You've got 80 kilometers from the channel between Flushing and Breskens, 80 kilometers from there to Antwerp. And that's 50 nautical miles in real money. And it's narrow, it's winding, it's shallow. It's got sandbanks that can move. it's had buoys or buoys, if you want to use the North African term, that have been removed by the German occupying forces. So it really is a massive challenge. I just got the key points on there, of course. Down towards the to the left hand of the screen, you had a lot of German shore batteries around Nocker, around Zeebrugge, which hadn't been captured at this point. You've got lots of shore batteries, obviously, on the Walcheren Island, which was and between them, and also the batteries they'd got at Breskens. There was no way for the vessels to get through there, so there was that problem for them. They were key locations. Then moving to the east, Terneuzen, which was held already by the Canadian forces, that was going to be a staging point for the minesweeping forces. And then, of course, when you got further east than that, you're starting to get more fresh water, but you're going to get narrower channels, more shallow channels, and it's going to get more and more complicated. Plus, of course, you've then got Antwerp docks, which have been mined, which have been trashed, which have been booby-trapped, and which, as you said, Brad, are starting to come under attack from V1s and V2. So that's the battle space that the minesweepers are going to have to operate in. It is, without doubt, a hostile shore.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, sorry, just give you a little bit of break there, because that was great. It's an interesting scale, like you said. It's a long distance between the entrance, just say like Westkapelle or Flushing, all the way getting to Antwerp. When you think about that, and maybe in peace term times, it's not so bad. But when you're adding in all of this, it's a long distance to go. It's a lot to do, and it's gonna be a tough go. And that's including all of it. That's even when the fighting's over. But anyway, we'll get to that. Was there anything else you wanted to add on this map?
No, if we could flick on to the next one, Brad.
Yeah, of course.
So I'm just talking about the military threats now. I've discussed the shore batteries and the challenge they posed, and for navies, it was sort of almost become a doctrinal thing that you didn't try and take on shore batteries. And it was something that wasn't particularly didn't have a great success during the Napoleonic Wars, and of course the Navy still had memories of the Dardanelles campaign in 1915, trying to force the Dardanelles. Couldn't get past the forts, tried to get past the forts, ran into a minefield, lost 3 battleships in a day, and that then necessitated the whole of the Gallipoli campaign, which was a sort of failure on top of failure in that sense. So obviously the Navy is not going to try and run a gauntlet of that channel without both banks being secured.
Right.
And so the clearance of the Infatuate 1 and 2, I think it's Switchback, is it, for the Breskens pocket?
Yeah.
They're all about securing the banks so that the minesweepers can do their job. And that's what those operations are about. So you're going to take out the shore batteries, the minesweepers are going to go in, and they're going to start dealing with the minefields. And the blue lines in those zones show that some of the minefields that were discovered, and those are just in the outer areas. And then as you get into the inner parts of the Scheldt, you really don't know. Well, you can guess what you're going to find, and I'll come on to that. But there's going to be more mines there. There's going to be obstructions, so it's really going to be quite a significant threat. Also, you're going to have controlled minefields, ones kept under observation that they can initiate if they see a ship going over it. And later on, you're going to get threats from sort of unconventional craft like human torpedoes and mini submersibles. So there's a range of threats. German Air Force as well. Significant E-boat activity to the north coming down and potentially attacking the minesweeping forces as well. So a really complex battle space is basically what I'm presenting for you there.
Yeah, it just seems to just keeps adding one on top of the other on top of the other. There's just so many factors here going on that, again, it's just amazing that they were able to do so. To me, it's fascinating. All right, you want to keep going?
Yeah, next one, please. So I'm for those viewers who don't really know much about mine warfare, and this is the classic, the archetypal image of a sea mine.
Yeah.
And yeah, these were here in abundance. These were moored mines, so tethered to the seabed, normally bobbing around just below the surface, because obviously it makes life too easy for the ships if they can actually see the mines. So these could be laid at various depths below the surface. If you lay them slightly deeper, you're going to get the bigger hulled ships. You can, as a tactic, lay them shallow to try and take out the minesweepers, and then get at the bigger ships later on. And also you can have them lay them so they're attached to their sinkers, so that they can pass several days or even weeks before they bob up and start to become active.
Right.
So these are going to present a significant challenge, even though that sort of technology is already decades old in the Second World War. It's not really far moved on from the First World War. But these are contact mines, and ships have to come into contact with these. With a large vessel, it's a mission abort. A smaller vessel, yeah, one of these will sink you.
Yeah. So sorry, just a quick question, just for my own even understanding. So you say contact mine, does that mean contact with any part of the mine?
No, it's the horns. The horns are chemical horns. You bash a horn. It's made of a softish lead. It releases a chemical inside that. There's a chemical file, a glass file inside there, ruptures, leaks down onto battery terminals, initiates a battery, sets off an explosive charge in there. So
yeah, that's great to know.
Yeah, it took about anything between 100 to 500 pounds of explosives in those.
Yeah, because again, I don't claim to be any sort of naval expert by any means, but yeah, I always assumed that there was some part that had to touch, but then again, we'll probably talk about that soon. But that's great to know finally.
It's the contact horns you want to keep clear of, and what happens then, of course, is when it comes to the surface, it's visible. Under the Hague Convention, they should then be set to self-sterilize.
Right.
But the Germans didn't always obey the Hague Convention, so they could still be active on the surface. And other tunes they could play with them. They could fit them with very, very heavy cable moorings, which make them difficult to sweep, or even put small explosive charges beneath the mine, so that minesweeping gear would be blown up and get trashed. So
which they did on the land as well, right? Anti-personnel mines, under tank mines, kind of thing. Yeah.
So these were tunes you could play with the contact mines.
Mm-hmm.
And then moving on to the ground mines, the next ones. Okay, so these are the real ship killers. You took over 1,000 pounds of HE in these things. They lay on the seabed. Obviously, they're not contact mines. A ship that came into contact with them was already in trouble. So they could be initiated by either a magnetic signature, so the ship's magnetism, which is why a lot of our minesweepers were being built of wood at this stage. It could be triggered by an acoustic signal, just the sound of the propellers or ship's machinery could initiate them. And then a development we discovered to our cost after D-Day, the Germans also had pressure initiation, which would detect the pressure wave of the ship. And that was a real nightmare, the pressure mine, or the oyster mine, as they're sometimes referred to. So, and then of course you could have combinations of them. You could have them such that they were sort of set so that the mine would wake up when it got a magnetic indication, and then explode when it got peak acoustic signature. So really, really complicated. Lots of settings you can play with on these. You can have ship counts on them, so they can count off 4 or 5 vessels before they try to go live, or they can just sit inert for 30 days before they come to life. So these are going to be a real challenge for us as well.
Yeah, and we have actually a really good question here. Is how do tides affect the seabed anchored mines?
Yeah. And when you're doing minefield planning, it's something you really have to think about. I'll talk about 2 aspects. First of all, very strong tide waves. They can actually make your mines walk. And if it's a very, very strong tidal stream, the whole sinker and mine can basically sort of bob along on the seabed. and just be taken away. So one of the rules of minefields is if you lay it, if you want it to remain effective, you're going to have to keep relaying in that area, because over a period of time there is some attrition there.
Mm.
The other thing for a tidal stream is when you get a strong tidal stream, especially a current on the surface, it will force the mine casing over at an angle and cause it to what we call dip. So it might be set to lie, say, 3 fathoms beneath the surface, or 18 feet. But a strong tidal stream will sort of force it sideways a bit at an angle. It'll remain tethered, but then it might sink down to 28, 30 feet below the surface. So one of your minesweeping, or one of your tactics to get through a minefield, perhaps, might be to go when the tidal stream's at its strongest and the mines are likely to be depressed. And of course, then the minesweepers are going to factor this into their minesweeping calculations. They might have to set their minesweeps a bit deeper to try and get these mines if there's a chance of significant dip. So I'm digging.
That's
really rusty old theory coming out there.
Hey, that's good. That's great to hear. I mean, these are things that I'm sure a lot of people watching don't have any experience with. So to hear all the myriad of factors, to me, that's just utterly fascinating. That all these different parts you have to take into account for something maybe in the popular mind's eye is fairly simple. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's great. Anyway, so yeah, we can keep going. If are you finished with the magnetic mines, or do you want to keep going?
Finished with the influence mines, and then these were smaller mines, and these were ones we started to encounter at Cherbourg, actually, and Cherbourg was infested with these. I think the nickname for the ones on the left were called Katy Mines. They were just a block of concrete, explosive charge embedded within it, and just a single contact horn on top. But what made these quite dangerous was the snag line attached to the horn, and the snag line would sort of float on the surface. And the idea was that it would snag in vessels' propellers and set the mine off. So you've now got a problem in the whole of the water column, from the very surface of the water right down to the seabed. There is a threat, and we'll talk about how we might counter these ones. And then the other mine is just again a very, very simple small mine, and these were laid mainly off invasion areas, or areas where they thought might want to defend your beaches, and a lot of these were found in the Scheldt Estuary as well. So we were getting a lot of these as well. So to combat these, we need a lot of different tools, minesweepers, and different kinds of minesweepers with different capabilities. And what I'll do now, I'll just go through what sort of vessels those are. And starting top left there is these were called fleet sweepers. These were big, 1,000 tons plus, capable of anti-submarine work as well. Well armed, well protected. They could conduct all forms of minesweeping. They could keep up with the main fleet. They had good self-sustainability. But of course, these were built of steel, and they had deeper drafts. So that's immediately going to limit you as to the depths of water that you could be able to operate them in. But these were used during the Scheldt campaign, as I'll describe. And then bottom right, like their smaller brothers, these were called yard minesweepers. They're built and developed in America. The ones built for the Royal Navy were called British yard minesweepers, BYMS. These were smaller versions of the fleet sweepers, made of wood, so really good for the magnetic threat. And these could, again, carry out all forms of sweeping. They just didn't have quite the same amount of muscle, if you like, in terms of the sweep gear wasn't as robust, because these were smaller vessels, smaller engines, but obviously much better for the shallower waters that we're going to start talking about. So these were the British yard minesweepers, BYMS. Moving on. Then the motor minesweepers, sometimes called Mickey Mouse sweepers. These were developed in 1940, 1941. A lot of them were built in Canada. Canada created a lot of these. cheap and cheerful. And the first versions were only 105 feet long, based on a trawler design, but just what you needed for acoustic sweeping and magnetic sweeping. So that's their role, and they to a certain extent they saved the day on the east coast of Britain when the German mine offensive was really hitting us in the 1940s, 41. These really came and eased the strain a lot. So these were hugely important vessels. Lots and lots of flotillas of them all around the UK coast. And they did a great job, largely unheralded. Bottom right, we even had motor launches, and we talked about the various depths at which you get mines. Well, if you're going to sweep in really shallow waters, you're going to be looking at these sort of things. So motor launches used in the minesweeping role, a tactic that had been developed in the Mediterranean. We then used it for D-Day. Each of the fleet minesweeping flotillas that went in, each beach at Normandy had 2 flotillas of minesweepers. And flotilla was led in by a couple of these motor launches with shallow sweeps running, just to try and catch any mines that might have been laid to target the heavier sweepers. And I was talking about Normandy. We'll give a shout out to the 31st Minesweeping Flotilla, Canadian Minesweeping Flotilla, the only non-Royal Navy minesweeping flotilla that was doing one of the assault channels on D-Day. So shout out to the Royal Canadian Navy there.
Yeah, so that's why I was kind of smirking when you said that. It's funny because I found, like you and me were talking earlier about the footage and things that I do. I found some great footage from Omaha Beach from the boats that you don't often see because it doesn't show combat-y things or what have you. So I was like, I got to find some connection here. So that's how I learned about the 31st. It was like, this counts, good enough, because they made the way through for the landings at Omaha, because there's Canadian mix throughout all of Overlord, not just Juno Beach. But that's just a quick aside. I think that was just quite interesting, and that's how I think I kind of started to dig a little deeper in the minesweeping stuff.
Yeah, I sort of going down a rabbit hole, but I think someone showed a massive failure of imagination when they allocated a Canadian minesweeping flotilla to an American beach, when there was a perfectly good Canadian beach they could have gone and done the job on.
I mean, yeah, that happens too with the air squadrons. I don't know. I don't know who makes those decisions, but that's how things go.
Yeah.
Anyway, so is that it for the smaller ones?
That's the motor launches, and then move on to the next slide. Yeah, I'm always going to talk about minesweeping trawlers, top left, because in a war in an aspect of war that's largely unrecognised, the minesweeping trawlers have a place to themselves in terms of being ignored. We requisitioned over 1,000 trawlers in the UK for minesweeping in the Second World War. Over 200 were sunk, so 20% casualty rate. And they did an incredible job. And wherever minesweeping operations were taking place, at some point these minesweeping trawlers were going to appear on the scene as well. So these were, I think, a couple snuck through to Antwerp quite early in the campaign, as we'll come to. And then on the bottom right, I've put that one in. That's a trawler that's used as a down layer because it was important to a sweeping technique. It's no good sweeping water if you can't tell people what you've swept, where you've swept, and mark it. So a flotilla of minesweepers or a group of minesweepers would always have a down layer, quite often a converted trawler, following astern of them, popping little buoys in the water just to show roughly where the channel was. So minesweeping force would always include down layers, and that's why Colsay appears there.
Cool. Yeah, well, that just makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
And these guys were P parties, the port party divers. They became active on the 7th of June, so D+1. They were in Ouistreham, in the docks there. Yeah. And their job was underwater mine disposal, booby trap removal, anything you wanted in the ports. And these guys were in incredibly high demand as we captured the various ports of France and moved up the coast into Belgium, Ostend. Everyone wanted these guys because every port was thoroughly trashed. And for the the Scheldt, these divers were operating in Antwerp. They started there on about 14th or 15th of October, I think, at about the same time that Switchback kicked off, and they were doing a massive job of clearing all the stuff that had been left behind in the harbour. So these P parts were an essential part of the Orbat.
Yeah, it almost looks like something out of a 1950s sci-fi movie or something.
Yeah,
A little bit, but
not a fun job because
no, definitely not.
harbors in Northern Europe, the standard visibility is about 1 foot. You're doing the job by touch, by and large.
Yeah, and that is definitely not fun.
So those were the forces were going to do the job. How were they going to do it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, top left is the mechanical sweeping we use to cut the moored mines, the contact mines. So basically, you're dragging a wire astern of you, being held out to the side of the ship by an otter, similar to what trawlers use for a trawl net, and being depressed by a kite. So that's getting it to the right depth. And you then operate your sweepers in a formation so that everyone but the lead vessel is pretty much sweeping in safe water. The guy up front is the one who's taking the biggest risk. Again, this is technology that was used in the First World War, but it was still relevant, and we were even using it. We were using it. The last minesweeper sunk by a mine was sunk doing this in 1945. So it was. Although it was well practiced, although it was very effective, it was still dangerous. Mines were always dangerous. So right up until the end of the war, off Thailand, we were losing ships minesweeping using these well-established, well-honed techniques. But that's what your mechanical minesweepers were going to be doing. Turning now to what your magnetic minesweepers.
Sorry, just one quick question here, because this is something I've always kind of wondered. Because we just did a show last week about leftover munitions from the war with Alex Suchin, which is a whole fascinating topic. So that got me thinking about what happens. So it says the mine is to be destroyed.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, what happens is a formation of sweepers is followed by a Dan layer laying the Dan. And also, there's normally a vessel nominated as the mine destructor ship. And on there, you've got a shooting party, and they're firing the mines. Now, the imagery is always, you hit the horn of the mine, and it goes bang. But what they're really trying to do is hit the casing of the mine so that it lets water in and sinks to the seabed. If you hit the horn of the mine, it goes bang. Well, that's the bonus. But really, you're just aiming for the casing. So mine destructor ships are following to try and make these mines safe and by sinking.
Which would cause problems later, but good for the wartime operations.
Indeed, and after the war, year on year, and it was still finding mines lying on the seabed in the Scheldt, most of them inactive and sunk and holed, some of them still fully functional. Back to the back.
Yeah. So anyway, so that just it kind of ties in with what we were talking about last week. So it just keeps making me think of, because you can see these things in just diagrams and read them, and you go, okay, what does that actually mean? So it's really interesting to hear that. So anyway, sorry. So we can keep going with the magnetic.
So the magnetic sweep, you'd get at least 2 minesweepers acting as a pair. And they would be pulsing electrical signals down to they were called loops, but they were just lengths of buoyant cable, and together they would create a magnetic field, which would hopefully trigger a magnetic mine. I talked about the settings is going to be key. Even at the beginning of the operation, the minesweepers were being sent settings to apply to these sweeps just to get the best results and things like that. And also the Germans would use the different polarities and things. So the sweeping effort, Brad, we're talking about 80 kilometers, 50 nautical miles, a channel of whatever width, sort of 3 or 4 miles at the mouth, really narrowing. But they were going to have to do this channel. Well, initially they thought 15 times to cover all their bases in terms of ship arming delays and ship counts and things like that. In the end, they ended up doing 20 runs over every piece of water in the channel. And that really dictated the length of the operation, quite frankly, just to be sure that they backed everything. But that's how the magnetic sweepers were going to be operating. And then the acoustic sweepers. I just want to show this one top left, the motor minesweeper. In the bows of the ship, there's what looks like a little drum. Inside that is a pneumatic hammer, or something very close to a pneumatic hammer. And that drum would be lowered over the bows into the water, turned on, huge amount of noise, and that would hopefully set off acoustic mines. So that was a very early, very primitive, very effective way of sweeping mines. And then the other method on that, which looks even more primitive, they found quite at the beginning of the war, just throwing grenades into water or firing machine gun bursts into the water could sometimes set off an acoustic mine. And what also they could do is put small explosive charges in, which would also either set the mines off or sterilizing them.
So it would be someone literally just hanging over the side and tossing something in?
Yeah, what they developed was actually a little box in which you could put a few dozen grenades with a handle, and you just turned the handle to go. And at one point, I think 3 days into the operation, the boss of the minesweeping forces is asking for 10,000 more grenades.
Wow.
So they were really working very well in shallow waters. Obviously, they seem to be particularly effective.
Which makes perfect sense. Yeah.
For doing this, everyone else was keeping well clear of them because the waters were just lifting up around them.
Yeah, I do not blame them.
Excuse me. So those are the sorts of minesweeping techniques. Those are the sort of ships we're using. Where did these vessels come from? And I've used this, which provoked some really supportive comments on Twitter a few days ago. It's it's showing the Thames Estuary, and there's a book by Nick Hewitt called The Essential Highway, talking about the coastal convoys around the UK. And London and the southeast were just swallowing up, tens and hundreds of thousands of tons of coal a week. Mm-hmm. And these were being supplied from convoys from the northeast of England and Scotland. And this was the toll they were facing in the Thames, because the Germans made the Thames Estuary a major mining feature. Now, obviously, we had to have a massive minesweeping force to keep London open. And at times early in the war, London was almost closed down by the mining threat. We lost over 300 ships there, 150 naval ships, 150 merchant ships. But the point is that what we've got in the Thames Estuary, in hydrographic, oceanographic conditions that were sort of aligned to the Scheldt, was an incredible force of minesweepers, an incredible minesweeping experience. So whereas most of the D-Day minesweepers were still working on the smaller ports up and down the north coast of France and into Belgium, the guys who were going to come and open the Scheldt were these guys who'd been fighting to keep London open for all this time, because they had the best experience of fighting in these sort of conditions. So it was the Scheldt minesweeping force that it was the Sheerness and the Harwich minesweeping forces that were going to be doing the job for us. And if we then move to the next slide, we just get a breakdown of what those forces were.
Right.
And Force A were the guys who were actually going to go into the river and do the job. And you can see the size and scope of forces we're talking about there. We're talking about 30 of the British Yard minesweepers, 30 plus of the motor minesweepers, 16 motor launches. They're going to be doing the shallow sweeps. MFVs are motor fishing vessels, so those are trawlers. And also you can see a flotilla of LCPLs. So imagine in waters that are too shallow for the motor launches, they were now going to be starting using landing craft with sweeps astern of those. And those were particularly going to be used against the snagline mines. So that's what their role was. And you had two forces there, the the bigger force, Minesweeping Force A, was the one that was going to go into the estuary and do the job. Minesweeping Force B was going to do the outer approaches and get them in there. So that's the breakdown of forces there. And at various points, we had, I think, on one day during the minesweeping operation, there were 162 minesweepers operating, either in the outer approaches to the Scheldt and in the Scheldt. So that's the scale of the operation that was involved.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note here is, and we'll get to the details, but so keep this in mind, those watching, the numbers here. This isn't a small operation. And you mentioned earlier they had to sweep 20 times, and we've talked about the scale. So this is not something that was, I don't know, done without the full. I'm talking about the minesweeping only here, not the rest of the Scheldt, but the minesweeping is given the equipment they need. It's just this is the scale that it's being dealt with, and why this took so long to do, I think, is something important to keep in mind.
Yeah, I know, and yeah, we'll come to sort of pressure on the minesweeping commanders in terms of how soon they can do it.
Yeah,
these were the best in the business, and they took as long as they took because that's what
that's what it takes. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of the plan, this was broadly how they envisaged doing it. Obviously, no plan survives contact with the enemy.
No.
The landing craft were ruled out on day one because of the weather. So the landing craft, didn't appear until very late in the day. So what you're going to do, you're not going to stop the operation. You're just going to carry on with the motor launches on point and just accept that you might be losing one or two of those more than you thought you'd lose.
Mm-hmm.
So the plan was to go in first with the landing craft to get the snag lines, a motor launch with sonar just to try and detect any wrecks in case you could get the sweepers to go around the wrecks to avoid snagging gear. Then you were going to go a shallow mine sweep with the motor launches. Then you're going to start marking the channel. Then you've got your the bottom one there is the motor minesweeper with the washing machine. That's the explosive sweep that's being churned out on a handle. So that's that part of the formation. And then moving further astern of that on the next slide. So you're going to have your yard minesweepers, wire sweeping, vessels there for mine destruction, the command ship. He didn't actually operate much at sea. It wasn't an operation that you could effectively command over that span of water. Mm-hmm. Bringing up the rear, you have a massive formation of motor minesweepers. Obviously, the size of that formation would vary depending on what the width of the channel was going to be and how much sea room you had, because there wasn't a lot of sea room there. There wasn't a lot of room for turning. And just sweeping in a straight line is difficult. You then try and turn your sweepers in formation, and that's a whole new world of pain, quite frankly. But that was the idea. That's broadly how they wanted to sequence the operation. And if we then move on to the next slide, we'll just go through some of the key timings, the timeline for the battle. I'm just going to take a glass of water.
Yes, of course. Yeah, go ahead, take a break. Yeah, it's great to see again those maps with someone explaining what it is, because again, I've seen those in I don't know how many books about Normandy and all the different operations and talking about it in kind of an academic sense, but to understand what that actually means, but also the threats, is something that I think you can only do in a forum like this. I'm not trying to toot my own horn or anything by doing it, but you know what I mean? It's hard to fathom without someone explaining it, who knows what all of that means. It's to me, it's so interesting. Yeah.
So here we are, and the operation is called Operation Calendar, and starts on the 4th of November. But obviously, there's stuff going on before then. The forces are starting. The Force B is forming up from middle of October, quite frankly, at Ostend. It's got quite a lot of work to do around Ostend and cover from Ostend to the outer Scheldt. 1st of November, you've got Infatuate 1, Infatuate 2. Infatuate 2, you've got the battleship Warspite monitors Erebus and Roberts. They are swept into their gun firing boxes by the heavy fleet sweepers of the 18th Minesweeping flotilla. So that flotilla is sweeping them in there because they're going to be operating in deeper water. You can use your bigger minesweepers to get them in there. So that's happening on the 1st. No attempt to get in on the 1st, but on the 2nd, they sort of stretch the envelope a bit, and they start sweeping a bit closer towards Zeebrugge, which hasn't been captured, and they bag about 5 mines, but then they're taken under shore fire, and so an attempt to pass some minesweepers all the way up the river at that point is abandoned. They get 3 ships damaged. They get a few guys killed, and I'm not going to go into numbers of casualties because actually, in naval warfare is slightly different in this sense. I'm not going to try and make God rest their souls, and full respect to them, but I'm not going to try and make a big deal about 4 or 5 sailors being killed when the Canadian Army has faced the casualties it's faced in the Breskin's pocket. So I'm not going to sort of get into that game. But we take casualties. We get 3 vessels damaged, and we reach the Dardanelles Napoleonic Wars mode. There's no point in trying to force these narrows yet. We'll just hold off. And then on the 3rd of November, I think, is when Switchback completes. Zeebrugge is captured. The final shore batteries there are captured. Most of the heavy batteries on Walcheren Island have been captured as well. So it's on the 3rd that they're able to slip a small force of motor launchers, minesweeping trawlers, and a couple of motor minesweepers, Belgian motor minesweepers. It was an allied operation. There were Belgian motor minesweepers and Dutch BYMS involved in this one as well. So some of those are able to slip up to Antwerp, and what they will do is they will start sweeping back from Antwerp towards the main force. So that's quite neat. It's what they achieve on the 3rd. And then on the 4th, calendar is formally started, the clearance of the Scheldt, and that's when Force A is arrived from Sheerness, and that's when, with both sides of the bank relatively secure, they're still taking fire from batteries around Flushing on Walcheren, but they get through the Breskins Flushing area, and they sweep all the way through. That's their first lap. That's a very narrow channel. That's one sweep. And Force A gets all the way up to Terneuzen, which is just short of halfway up the channel. And they anchor overnight there. And that's the 4th. That's the opening day of Operation Calendar. And from then on, it's an attritional battle. They're widening the channel. They're having to contest with very, very bad weather, which on a number of days just completely aborts any effort to conduct minesweeping. Chewing up lots of gear. And if you go to the next slide, Brad, bottom right, these explosive charges just trashing the gear. Top left, you can see what the reality of the minesweeping is. That's par for the course. They're popping these things all the time. As I say, 74 on the first day on the 4th of November. So they're just going in there. They're widening the channel. They're re-sweeping. They're check sweeping. They're going again and again and again. And it's just not a safe environment. And you've got E-boats coming down from the north of Holland. They're laying further mines off Ostend. You've then got midget submersibles starting to conduct attacks. The Danlair I showed you earlier, the Colsay, she was sunk by a midget submarine off Ostend. We're losing ships still being lost to mines off Ostend, off the mouth of the Scheldt. We lose a motor minesweeper and a motor launch in the river itself. And we're just sweeping in a minesweeper song, which the only words are sweeping, always sweeping. And that's
accurate.
And then on the 10th, and quite interesting, on the 10th, 21st, it's clear from a series of signals I've seen that 21st Army Group and COMZ, the American Chafe Logistics Commander, they're starting to put pressure on and saying, okay, so you told us at the end of November, but come on, when are you really going to be open? And there's a signal from the captain in charge of Minesweepers saying, look, I've had the conference today, and this is the line I took with 21st Army Group. We might be able to get things done sooner, but we can't guarantee it because of the weather. We haven't even come across any pressure mines yet, so we don't know the full extent of the threat. We don't know how many of the mines are on delays or on ship counts or whatever. And yeah, you could go in, you could probably put a ship in now, but the risk levels are very high. If you do it, it's going to interfere with the minesweeping effort. And if you lose a ship in the narrow part of the channel, you're going to have a major, major problem. So he's signaling back to Commander-in-Chief Knorr, who's a UK admiral on the East Coast, who's overall in charge of this operation. But he also copies in Admiral Ramsey, who's, as I said, Eisenhower's senior maritime commander. And quite interestingly, Ramsey comes back and says, I agree 100%. So Ramsey is completely in complete agreement that this is not an operation that can be run. This is Ramsey who, before D-Day, said that the mine is the most significant threat that our invasion force will face. So he's very alert to the threat. He's not going to put undue pressure on the minesweeping force because he knows exactly how difficult this is. So he supports the minesweeping commander 100%. And all he says is, just signal us again on the in 5 days' time and tell us what your latest estimate is. But he takes all that pressure off just so that the minesweeping force can get on and do the job, which is what they do. So we move on. Next slide. On the 26th of November, they managed to slip. They get three coasters to go in, and then, but they still think the risk levels are too high. They've had a convoy forming up now for a few days, but they just hold it off slightly. And on the 28th, the first convoy goes into Antwerp. They've cleared the docks as well at this point. So the scale of the operation, they've nailed about 260 mines in the estuary, and in the immediate vicinity of the port, the locks, the basins, and just at the approaches to the port, they've bagged another 60. So this is the scale of what they've achieved. And they've been over every piece of water 20 times now, just to make sure on that. So the first convoy gets in. You've got vessels that you've got 10,000-ton vessels now able to go into Antwerp. You've got 220 wharfs available for them, and quite fittingly, I think, given the contribution of the Canadian Army in freeing the shore, the first vessel in that is the Fort Kataraki.
Yeah, which is a Canadian-built ship, and named for a Canadian river.
I think she's obliged to fly the Belgian ensign somewhere on there because there's a lot of signal traffic in the Admiralty War Diary about a sudden mad rush to find 6 Belgian ensigns. So, as a mark of respect to the Belgians, the first 6 ships in are also flying Belgian ensigns.
Yeah, and it's also interesting too because in reading about this, and there was a large fanfare for the arrival of the first ship, and there's representatives
which Eisenhower doesn't want.
Yeah, but they still do it. But there's adding to the chip on the shoulder thing I was talking about earlier. No Canadian representation.
No, so it's good that the Canadian ship was first in on the convoy.
That's something, I suppose. But after, as you said, the amount of effort and blood that's spilled, to Canadian blood that's spilled, to free the Scheldt, it's not a good optics. It doesn't look good.
I agree.
Yeah. But that's neither here nor there. So.
So the port's open. The port continues to function. but the threat continues, and we're still losing vessels in the Scheldt. A big Royal Fleet auxiliary oiler is sunk in the Scheldt. More sweepers are lost. There are some heavy German air raids, which lay more mines in the river. The E-boats are still laying mines off the mouth of the river. The attacks continue from submersibles and things. So that's going on. The V1s, V2s are still coming in. Interestingly, the P parties, the divers, were still operating in the docks when V2s were landing in the docks at the same time. So some significant threats there. But Antwerp's open, and I think probably the most telling thing about its strategic importance is that when Hitler launches the Ardennes offensive, what is the goal of the Ardennes offensive? It's to rub out Antwerp. In a rare moment of strategic clarity.
Yeah,
understands the importance of Antwerp.
Yeah, one of the two maybe. The one objective he's given to that. Yeah, to the Ardennes offensive to cut off Antwerp, which I always found is so telling, like you said, so telling about all of this, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to again. Market garden gets enough attention, but you've got market garden areas and all of that, and that failure, and what that means for the Rhine, and all of that, and then the Ardennes saying, Antwerp is important. So it's just, and again, the numbers within Antwerp port, like you were just mentioning there, are just staggering of what this port can take and what it does for the flank of this flank of the advance, right? And then also because that's what 1st Canadian Army is as well. So it's all part of this, and this is why I think it's such an important thing to go over.
I just touch on a couple of other aspects in terms of
course,
the maritime aspects of it, and I focus very much on the minesweeping aspect, but just some of the complexities linked to the waterway and what they achieved. Of course, I spoke about the dam laying, the laying of small dam buoys. These don't have a long shelf life. So at some point during the operation, they're bringing in big Trinity House, which is our lighthouse authority. They're coming into the waters, being protected. They're laying big marker buoys down now into the channel to show where the safe shipping routes are. They're rounding up all the Dutch and Belgian pilots they can, who can pilot the ships in there, because we don't have the local knowledge.
Right.
Yeah, swept it, but the local knowledge for getting ships up there, it's actually going to come from the Dutch and Belgian pilots, and fair call to them. On day one, on the 1st of November, they're saying we're here, we can go now. It was just like, hold on, we'll get back to you on that.
Yeah.
But they're ready to go. So you've got the buoyage, you've got the pilotage. You've also got the protection, the ongoing protection of the Scheldt that's going to be needed. So they're already talking about, do we put booms across the mouth of it? Do we use nets to mini submersibles getting in? It's decided too much of a constraint in already constrained waters, but they want ASDIC fitted launches to detect them. They're putting up a huge bloom barrage and things like that. They're putting in port control authorities coming in by sea and by land to run the port. So those are some of the maritime aspects that also have to be thought about in terms of running the port. But if we go now to the people who achieved this,
an important part, obviously, of those who do it.
that is Captain Hopper, who's in charge of the main minesweeping force. He's the guy lighting his pipe, so different restrictions about smoking in public there. So that's him and his operation team working in their HQ in Terneuzen for the operation. So that's them, and then I think the beating heart of any minesweeping force is the sailors. And I think you've got a great bunch of minesweeping sailors there. To anyone who served in the Navy, you would recognise that the guy on the left is the chef. And I just, if you'll indulge me, and this is a report.
Of course,
this is a observer who's on board the minesweeping force during the operation, and I think it's quite telling. It's quite a good story. This is Jack Hunter lent me this, by the way. It's Battle for Antwerp by Moulton. And I like it a lot because it actually talks about the minesweeping effort, which a lot of books on the Scheldt sort of neglect.
Sorry, you want to hold it up again? I just had to change the screen there.
Right.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah,
very interesting one that I can't find.
So the observer on board the Minesweeper. This is on a day in which the boats swept 13 mines, and the boats were taking a hammering. I mean, you set off 13 mines in a day. You know, you're going to be on your knees. The machinery is going to be falling apart. You know, the planks are going to be leaking, and the sailors are going to be pretty shot. But this is his observation. What struck me most about them was firstly their persistent delight in getting mines, and secondly their quite amazing stamina. They were such long, long days, sometimes desperately exciting with a record catch, but always long, always tiring, and always nerve-wracking. Never a moment without the constant threat of what might suddenly happen. And then, often just when it was least expected, it did. The sudden jarring impact, sometimes enough to knock you off your feet, the roar of the explosion, and as the great plume of mud and water subsided, the cheers of all the crew at the thought of yet another white chevron to be chalked up on the funnel. So I think that captures really nicely what it was, what the human experience was on board the Minesweeper.
Yeah, it's just that's great to hear. After again, like I keep saying, but reading these things kind of in abstract in the bigger books that talk about this for maybe a sentence or two, it's so great to hear what that meant, like what that means, right? Because one of the books talks about the chevrons. Yeah, every mine god they get a chevron, but what does that mean on the deck? You know, that's fascinating to hear.
So that's I think that's me ceasing transmission, and I'm open to questions if anyone can bear the sound of my voice anymore.
Yeah, if anyone's got any questions, there's the information again for the Twitter account. Again, this is such an important topic, and I think, I brought you on for the minesweeping, but the talking about your points about just the maritimes and the maritime element of this in general, what that means is so interesting, because again, that's the thing I think that struck me the most when doing my prep was the scale of this, and this I read that the 20 times and the estimates and all of that, but also it's cleared, but then there's still issues, right? There's still mines going off, like you mentioned, the types of mines. It makes perfect sense now of why these things get missed and what that all means. So it's just something, again, to fully understand that kind of, I think, gets lost in the shuffle. Again, going back to the chip on the shoulder, not even because it's Canadian, right? Because this is part of the Allied war effort, right? This part kind of gets lost in the shuffle of debates about market garden and what that means. And Monty, inevitably takes over the conversation like he does for most of them. And we're not looking at, the actual details of what this means. So I think like things that you're doing are great, that we get to understand this part of a battle that doesn't, I think, again, call me biased, but doesn't get the understanding that it deserves.
Yeah, quite.
Yeah. Oh, so we do have a good question here. How did they keep track of how many they had got?
They signaled in every mine, and also try and give as accurate a position as possible. So then they'd maintain a plot on the flotilla ship, on the lead flotilla ship. They'd maintain a plot of all the mines on the second in command of the flotilla, in case the flotilla boss got killed, and they'd also signal them in ashore, and they'd obviously they'd be marked up on a chart ashore. What you could do then, and quite often, if you see 3 mines in a fairly straight line, you think, that's a mine line, and then you're going to start. Well, you can sort of start to work out where the next mines might be.
Okay, so yes, that's sort of like a pattern.
Yeah. So you get an aerial mine lay. If you get
right,
if you get aircraft laying mines, it's going to be in a straight line.
Yes.
Pretty much. So those sort of things help.
Sorry, I'm reading this question here first. This is one about the Luftwaffe and their role in dropping the mines.
Yeah, the Luftwaffe came. There was a major raid in mid-December. There were smaller ones in November as well, but it was nothing like the scale off the Normandy beachheads. and from the night of the 6th of June onwards, and it was incessant. Off the Normandy beachheads, they laid about 1,500 mines in the following weeks. So the mine threat was at its peak, not just prior to the invasion, but after the invasion. The Luftwaffe was even more of a broken force by the time. So although the threat was there, although they did lay mines, they weren't able to achieve it on the scale. And interestingly, I don't think they used any pressure mines, which would have been a huge problem. But I think the depth of water counted against it, because it was fairly shallow water.
Right.
The pressure mines were not going to be effective in that, which was good for us. We didn't have a sweep for the pressure mine. We've got various sort of attempts at barges that could be towed over. One tactic involved running destroyers into an area at very high speed, then putting it into a handbrake turn, and the wash creating a pressure wave.
Right.
You're not going to do that.
That seems. I know very little about actually running a ship, and that sounds like a really bad idea. Yeah, that's something, again, that's how do you deal with these things, right? These new weapons, right? These new technology.
The E-boats were the most persistent offenders. They were still operating out of northern Holland. They were still getting down onto the routes.
Yeah, that goes on for, and I know just separately from other parts, especially with, and then, well, you also mentioned the midget submarines, how much of a threat they are. That goes on for a long time, because that affects the 1st Canadian Army's operations on around Nijmegen. So it's so interesting of how these little things are the ones that keep these things going. So I think this could be a last very good question that we didn't actually say. So how many were actually swept from the Scheldt total?
Excuse me. Right. And figures vary, and it's how you want to define the operation.
Right.
So if you talk about from the 4th of November, and you talk about operation calendar starting on the 4th of November, you're talking about 260. But actually, if you're looking at the operations in the immediate vicinity that happened beforehand, you're talking about 280.
It's a significant number either way. I mean, that's, as we've now learned, that's a lot.
And that's a really high concentration. And I think the record was one minesweeper got about 16 in one day.
Wow.
That's
impressive. No matter you slice it, that's impressive.
A lot of rockery.
If you remember that description and 16 times, that's a little nerve-wracking just thinking about. But so I think this is great. It's very educational in a very entertaining way. Your knowledge is great here.
Brad, thanks very much, and it's been a real pleasure. And it's always an honor for me to be given the opportunity to talk about the exploits of the Minesweepers. And,
of course, this is like you said, and I believe it's unheralded. So yeah.
The Scheldt was an incredibly tactically complex operation.
Yeah.
This one.
Well, yeah, this is just, as we said, this is just one part of a complicated. And I mean, I've got some more shows coming about this thing exactly. Like we're going to do, I'm doing a show on Infatuate, and we're going to talk about it generally, and maybe a few other things I might put out there. But again, this is just one part of so many moving pieces that really helps us understand. But thanks again. So I'm just going to give a little spiel at the end, and I'll come say goodbye in a second here. So thanks everyone for watching. This was another great show. Very, very interesting things. I learned a ton in prep and just listening to Nick's knowledge and experience. This is something special to hear. So and I think I'm going to get him to come back and we'll talk Normandy again, because that is so fascinating. But anyway, so thanks everyone for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please do. I say this every time, but it still remains true. I need your help. Any subscription you can give is very, very helpful. Please like the video as well, especially now. It really helps me with the whole algorithm and everything. It really, really helps. And kind of comment below about kind of anything you've learned from this and kind of how in-depth this grade was, so other people will see it. So other than that, if you do like what you see here, the Patreon account, there's a link in that as well. You get some benefits, and they're coming more and more all the time, but you also help keep the channel running, which I can't do without. So I really need as much support as I can get from that. Also, there's a link for one-time contributions. Buy me a coffee, which is very, very helpful and keeping this going. Again, can't do it without it, and I need as much help as I can get. So please do subscribe and like the videos and share them to someone who might be interested in them. They can still watch it afterwards and leave comments, and that's great. So please do if you enjoyed what you saw today. So everyone's giving great comments here. So that's great to see. Everybody's liking what they heard. So thanks again. And if that's all right with you, we'll, oh, sorry, wrong one here. We're coming fast and furious on me. It's great to have you. And if you want, we can come back and talk about Normandy minesweeping, because again, it's a crucial part.
I'd be delighted to do that.
That would be excellent. So we'll talk soon. But so thanks everyone for watching another On This Day in Canadian Military History live stream. So we'll talk to everybody